With Sage, otherwise known as the Sonic Amateur Games Expo, finished for 2021, it's safe to say that people loved this year's lineup. New 3D games such as Sonic Rush 3D, Big's Big World, and Sonic Riders DX all blew people away, and old classics returned like Sonic Before the Sequel Plus, Sonic Classic 2, and the Sonic Triple Trouble 16-bit remake. While I unfortunately was unable to stream any of the big 3D games for a whole plethora of reasons, I still enjoyed the last week of streaming. Therefore, in this video, I will be giving my thoughts and opinions on Sage 21. Keep in mind that this isn't a ranking, and none of these should be taken as full reviews, but rather quick summaries of how I felt playing these games. So without further ado, let's dive in. On the first day of Sage, I played a nice modern style game called Sonic Emerald Ties. Considering how I hadn't heard of the game prior to Sage, as well as the fairly vague and nonsensical name, I assumed that this would be a short, poorly put together game that would be over in 5 minutes and would lack anything memorable. How wrong I was. Featuring unique sprites, backgrounds, and I believe music, Emerald Ties has plenty of style that sets it apart. While I will say that the level design is a bit blocky and basic, the fact that Sonic has a pretty full moveset still allows you to make your own fun with how you approach obstacles. Enemies are fairly underwhelming, barely posing a threat, although there were some nice easter eggs in the form of a Bark-inspired boxer, and they were all well animated. Featuring 4 zones, 3 fully completed with 3 acts, and 1 with only 1 act, bosses are fairly good, although they fall into the classic trap era of being difficult to avoid, essentially meaning you're just tanking through loads of attacks, waiting to get a small window to hit them 2 or 3 times, and then repeating until either you die or they die. Level themes are fairly standard for a Sonic game, with a beach level, a ruins level, a volcano level, and a snow level. All of this comes together to create a game that looks stunning, but still needs work on the level design front. I still feel that this was a great place to start though. On the second day of Sage, I moved on to a game that I had already played an older version of, the Sonic Triple Trouble 16-bit remake. Since the last time I had played it, the creators added a new level with a new boss Knuckles. I think this game looks and sounds great, even if I don't think it looks as fresh and unique as Emerald Ties does. It borrows heavily from the Sonic 3 art style, but that isn't exactly a problem considering that game looks great anyway. The level design is alright, although I wouldn't say it felt particularly memorable, but I do think the new level is significantly better than the original two. Gimmicks in all the stages are just not very memorable, or they are too obtuse to feel natural. This is made up for with how good the bosses are, especially the first one. While the levels are all pretty standard fare, the bosses have unique patterns and plentiful attacks, or, failing that, great design and uniqueness. In a total 180 compared to the levels, I'd say the newest boss Knuckles is the worst, mostly due to the fact that his attacks are hard to avoid and don't have enough downtime between them to really allow you to close the distance between you. I'd say that this kept up the Sage momentum for me, and I think I'd probably enjoy this more if it wasn't for the fact that I'd already played last year's version. Third day of Sage, I moved on to Sonic and Zay, a shorter game than the last two. While they had 10 and 5 levels respectively, Zay only has 3, 2 depending on how you count the physics room. Comparatively, I feel this has a lot more of a mixed bag sprites-wise compared to the last two, as while I think this is my favourite Sonic sprite, official or not, a few sprites are reused from Sonic Mania. Level design is very vertically oriented compared to the last two, which inevitably causes the game to feel slower, which isn't helped by the fact that Sonic lacks most abilities beyond a spin dash. Physics are actually really nice, feeling fresh while still maintaining familiarity. The fact that all these zones are singular acts does mean that some inevitably feel that it could be more expanded upon, and the lack of a Banix, or hell, really any form of danger at all, does mean it is almost impossible to not feel that there's more of potential that just hasn't been realised yet. This is definitely the game that I'm looking forward to seeing in Sage's yet to come more than any others I've played over the week. After missing the 4th day due to a stream that wasn't really working, it does suck that the game I returned to suffers from a lot of problems that weren't reproduced in any of the other games I played. Before we start getting into the bad, we need to talk about what this game does right. The music is great, especially the opening menu theme. Although it does use some sprites from Sonic Mania, such as Sonic and Eggman, all the original ones are breathtaking. Not only are they completely unique compared to all other games I've seen at Sage, but the way they flow together, as well as the shading and colour choices used, makes it feel like you're almost running through a painting. And this praise applies to the entire game, the backgrounds, the enemies, and the foreground. The theming isn't exactly a unique concept, seemingly being based off the 4 seasons, but it's something that hasn't really been seen in a Sonic game. Sadly, how these beautiful aesthetics actually come together in the game causes it to fall flat on its face. Remember when I mentioned that Sonic Zay's physics feel fresh while maintaining familiarity? Totem goes way too far into the new and unique direction, with Sonic having an absolutely massive jump, yet he barely gains any height off ramps and can barely get up even small slopes. The sprites also blend together too well, with the background and foreground blending into each other to the point where you can't even see where the object actually is, which becomes very disorienting and confusing. It only gets worse when foreground items look like actual obstacles in the level, such as some of the pillars in the vacant valley zone. Enemies also suffer from this problem, blending into levels and causing you to run into them with no forewarning. Many of them also become invincible and damaging when they're in their attack phases, but there's so little warning that they're switching phases that you'll often jump into them while they're vulnerable, only for them to become damaging before you can land or react. The game is obsessed with crossing deaths, which yet again blends into levels to the point you can't see them, or alternatively fill up corridors and force you to slowly stop and start between separate crosses. Bosses are awful, featuring all the same problems as normal enemies, as well as being fought in subpar arenas that make them a miserable experience. Due to these many incredibly frustrating problems, this is the only game from Sage that I will actively try and get people to avoid. Never mind the fact that it's the only one I wouldn't get people to try and play. Avoid. To make up for the lost day, I did 2 streams on 2 games on the 5th day. After the intensely frustrating Sonic Totem stream, which ended up lasting just under an hour, I needed something much shorter and more relaxing. So, I turned to Pico Sonic, a single level demake of Sonic 3, designed to emulate the Sega Pico. A short but sweet game that lasts roughly 8 to 10 minutes, Pico Sonic takes Act 1 of Angel Island Zone, demakes it to probably a 4 to 8-bit game, and then hides 8 Pico Emeralds throughout. Your goal is to find all 8 and then reach the final goal. In case you're wondering why I spend so much extra time describing the basic outline of the game, it's because there really isn't much else to the game. Beyond the very cute art style and the only slightly grating chiptune soundtrack, there isn't much to discuss. Due to only being a single level long, Pico Sonic lacks any bosses, any enemies, and any goals beyond finding the 8 emeralds. This isn't to say you shouldn't play the game, it's a nice little time waster, but don't expect it to be anything it isn't. On the 6th day, I played Sonic Before the Sequel Plus, a remake of the original fan game. However, due to the fact that this is the only complete game that lasts any significant time, I have decided to wait until I have completed the game before giving any thoughts or opinions. Considering I have played 3 out of the apparent 7 zones, anything I say now could be completely opposite to what I believe by the time I finish the game. So, we'll move swiftly on to the 7th and final game. On the last day of Sage, I decided to go out with a bang, playing the breakout star of this year, Big's Big World. However, upon installing the game, I found it ran at 4 FPS before I even started running OBS, and realised it was impossible for me to stream it. Therefore, I had to quickly settle for another game, and landed on Sonic FGX Ultimate, an online Sonic fan game that seems to be based off Sonic Advance 2 and 3. It may not be as expansive as Big's Big World, but don't discount it yet. Featuring 4 acts, 2 bosses, and 6 unique characters, with Sonic having roughly 10 to 15 skins that change up how he plays. It's still got plenty to offer. With a fairly small hub world that houses the teleporter to each act, this is where you can meet other online players, most of whom appear to be Spanish. Each level is built to allow you to quickly build up astronomical speeds that will quickly get you to the end of the act, following the Sonic Advance 2 of logic of not needing platforming in a speed platformer, as long as the speed makes up for it. After completing the 2 acts of each zone, you'll meet a boss, which are the low points of the game. Having screen-spanning attacks which are too unpredictable to avoid, they also know how to take a hit, with most needing a seemingly endless amount of hits to kill. I can't really comment on the game's graphics, as most of them are ripped from the Advance trilogy, but I will say that there's a very obvious compression issue with many of the sound effects. Although perhaps not as interesting as the original game, I'm still glad I ended up playing this. So those are my opinions on the games I played at Sage 21. Now, you may be wondering if I'll be playing Sonic Colors Ultimate, considering that's coming out in a few days, and the answer is someday. Sega recently announced that SCU requires 26 gigabytes of storage space, as well as high-level PC specs to simply run the game, so I'm going to have to see whether it's either less intensive when it comes to Steam, or failing that, I'll have to find a way to link my PS5 to my laptop and record from there. Now Sage has ended, I'll be playing through Sonic Before the Sequel Plus and doing more mod showcases on Sonic Road Blast 2, although I'll soon be going back to school, which will likely slow how many videos I can make. So, until then, ciao.